don't apologize for being in sales. Don't apologize for being in sales. Like you're here to help people, period. And they picked up the phone, right? Like if you're calling, which you should do, if you're calling and they picked up the phone, they participated in the interruption, right? If they're reading the email, they're participating in the interruption. Don't apologize for that.
So a lesson I learned early on, maybe through sports that applied to sales, was this concept of knowing versus doing. And I remember reading this book on basketball that was kind of interesting. And a big point of that, and I was reading through it with my dad, who was in high school, was this concept that, hey, you probably know what you should be doing. You're probably just not doing it. And this is a really interesting take to me because who I'm about to talk to today, Jeff Bajorek, he's been talking a lot on his podcast about what it takes to be a top performer. And I think that this is a really, really big piece of that. So before we get to it, though, my name is Jason Bay. Welcome to Blissful Prospecting. In this podcast, I have conversations with top reps, sales leaders, and other experts to teach you how to turn complete strangers into paying customers. So today we're going to talk about what it takes to be a top performer with my good friend, Jeff Bajorek, who is an advisor and sales coach at Parabola Consulting. Jeff, good to jam with you, man.
Man, always. It's been too long since we've done this. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So this concept of top performers, have you, like when you were growing up, did you have an obsession at all, whether it was sports or anything, like studying people that were really, really good at their craft? Where does that curiosity come from for you?
Wow, I love where you went with that. No, not when I was growing up, but I was always taught that if it's worth doing well. Mm-hmm. And I always recognized, I didn't study it. I didn't have this fascination and I just was, diving into it or anything, but it was always really prevalent when someone did something really, really well. And then as you get older, and I think about athletes and baseball and basketball, and I followed all the sports living in a 4-sport city here in Detroit. You notice when you see greatness, but it's not until you get older that you start to recognize the nuance, right? Yeah. So you can see when someone's hitting 350, a professional baseball player hitting 350, that's great. You hear the buzz around it, but it's not until you do something for a while that you start to pick up on that nuance and that subtlety. And it wasn't until I got further into my professional career where I noticed some of the things, just some of the little tricks. And not even tricks, because I don't like to prescribe tricks, but you see someone who has such mastery over what they do that they can appreciate things, they can recognize things, they put in these little flourishes just because they can, and it just you see what is created as a result of that, and it's fun.
Yeah. I'm curious, in your sales journey, when did you first start to think about sales as a skill versus just something that you do? You know what I mean? Because a lot of people do the act of quote unquote selling, but there isn't really any kind of constant improvement, type of motion that people go through, When did you first start to think of it like a skill, if that was something that you thought about early on?
Right away, actually, because I wasn't very good at it.
Oh, okay.
And I've told the story before, but I was really convinced that I could sell. I didn't want to, but it was an opportunity. It's kind of cool. I was curious. I was interested. This guy thought I could do it. He's willing to pay me some money to do it. And you know what? And I literally told myself, I said, Jeff, try for a year. If you don't like it, go back to doing what you were doing before. You're good at it. And I never intended to leave, but this seemed like a really cool little detour. And so I remember being frustrated by how poor I was at it. Because I'm a talented guy. I'm smart. Tell me what to do. I'll do it. And I had this interesting conversation with the guy that hired me. I was doing it for about 6 months. And I just came in kind of mid-year review or midway review. Really, I started in August. And he said, I said, yeah, I'm just frustrated. I feel like I should be better at this. And he said, okay, that's fair, but you've only been doing it for 6 months. And I said, yeah, that's 6 months. He says, Jeff, you got your degree in sports medicine. You became an athletic trainer, worked at a hospital. I said, yeah. He said, how long did it take you to get your degree? I said, 4 years. He said, and then you took a certification exam. I said, yep. And then how did you feel? I said, I felt like I could do it. But he's like, okay, in the 3 years since you got certified, how much better are you? And I said, yeah, I mean, I feel like I still have more to learn, but I'm pretty good. And he said, okay, that's 7 years of practice. You think you can master selling in 6 months? I said, okay, fair. Touche, right? Here I am looking at a guy who's a career salesman, done very, very well for himself. But like, what did that reflect of my impression on him, right? And so I was humbled in the moment, quite appropriately. But I started then to pay attention. And that was the first time I gave myself enough leash to say, well, all right, maybe this isn't something you just master in a day. But then I went on sales calls with him and I saw him do things so casually and effortlessly and successfully. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? And that's where I knew that actually put things in more perspective for me. I was like, I've got a long way to go, but let's lean into this.
Let me know what you think, but I kind of feel like if you're good at selling in the first 6 to 12 months on the job, that really the thing you're good at is probably following a really good system. If your company taught you like a really good sales system, you probably are unconsciously competent, and not unconsciously competent in a way that's mastery. Like I'm really good, I don't have to think about it. You're really good and you don't think about it, because you're just following. Like this was what my sales career was like. My first sales job, I fucking crushed it. But I actually didn't know why some of the stuff worked. And I look back now and I'm like, I didn't understand actually how to sit and have empathy for someone. You know what I mean? I didn't really actually understand that. I just had really good sales training and systems. And it was dialed down to a T. I was selling house painting services. It was like, you're going to be there for an hour and 45 minutes. So you have 15 minutes to drive to the next house. We're going to stack 5 of those on a Saturday, 5 of those on a Sunday. And we're literally in 15-minute blocks. Here's what that hour 45 is going to look like to a T. You know what I mean? You're going to build rapport. You're going to do this. You're going to fish for, some objections that you think might be coming up and get them out in advance so you can prevent them. And then it was dialed in. And I just followed that system because they've been doing that for 30 years.
Right.
What do you think of that though?
I love where you're going with this because there's a difference between selling a lot of things and knowing how to sell.
Yeah.
And just because you sold a lot of things, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with selling a lot of things. Like if you are fulfilled by just, closing deals and selling transactional engagements or products or solutions or services, like you were talking about with house painting, like, hey, right on. That's very noble. There's nothing wrong with that. What I always sought was to understand why stuff worked, though, because that's kind of where my brain goes. I'm kind of engineering minded. I like figuring out how things work because then if something breaks, I can fix it. And when I first really learned how to, or when I first started getting real training and real coaching and real mentoring in sales or in selling, I had someone to have those conversations with, like, why do you think that works? What is going on? What's really going on? And that developed a deeper understanding, which led to a certain amount of mastery. And I say that because there's you'll never actually fully master selling. It's one of the greatest things about it is that you can come so close to perfection and then something changes or another variable is added or whatever, and you have to continue to explore. And I've always prided myself on knowing how to sell and knowing what selling means, not just being able to make sales. And just, appreciating the difference there. And I think one of the problems, particularly with a lot of startups and companies that want to get off the ground fast, is they expect their systems to be so perfect that people can just settle in and sell and make revenue. And that's a lofty goal. It's worthwhile. But you're shortchanging the long-term potential of your organization if you're not helping people understand why things work. And the real interesting thing is you can only prepare for so many variables and so many objections, and you can, kind of 80-20 rule the whole thing. Like we know most of the time we get these objections, and in the odd time where we don't get these objections or we're not ready for that, well, okay, I guess this one's just going to drop out and we're going to go find another one. You can make up for those inefficiencies with volume. But I'm so fascinated by sales, how they happen, how they're created, how they're completed, how they're fulfilled. Like, to me, that's the best part, and why I love what I do, is that I'm a geek for this stuff too. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a huge difference between closing transactions and knowing how to sell. And I just think when you
Yeah.
know how to sell it, everything else is just so much more fun.
Yeah. And you can apply it through so many different
Oh,
contexts too. I went from selling house painting services to selling agency services to selling done for you services to selling consulting to now selling training and coaching to companies and then adapting that to sell to individuals. You know what I mean? You have
mhm.
that context when you have the understanding of it.
Yeah,
Um,
and you can pick it up, move from industry to industry. You can move
yep.
from company to company. You put me in a room with any salesman or saleswoman, for that matter, any seller. You put me in a room with them, we can talk. I
Yep.
don't care if they sell stuff I've never seen before. We can talk.
Yeah.
Because and
Yeah.
we have the same problems too, by the way. We have the
Yep.
same issues that we run into. We have the same strategies for, or similar strategies for, overcoming them. And it's whether or not they're even well read. I'm not saying, oh, have you picked up Anthony Iannarino's book or Mike Weinberg's book or whatever. It's not even about that stuff. It's that we speak a common language when you speak the language of selling. It's
Yeah.
universal.
I can't imagine what it was like before there were many best practices. Could you imagine in America, let's say, when commerce first became a thing and there were people actually selling stuff, not a business owner selling their stuff, but a salesperson, someone was
Mm-hmm.
hired to sell something.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what it would be like figuring that out from scratch. You know what I mean? You talked about objections, and it's like, hey, we know there's maybe 4 or 5 categories of like the types of objections that we might want to anticipate and prevent. And imagine just starting from scratch, dude. Just
Yeah,
having to figure it out. It's kind of crazy to think about.
I don't know how difficult it would have been though, because like we've talked about this before off the
Yeah.
podcast, but selling's not that complicated.
Yeah.
You hear the same objection a couple times, even before you coin it as an objection. It's like, oh, it's either A, oh, good point. Never really considered that before. Sorry to bother you. I'm going to go away now, right? I mean, that's one logical explanation. Or it could be, I thought you might think of that, so I thought of it too. Like with someone who's motivated by purpose, wants to do good, has a solution they believe can actually help somebody, just because you haven't heard the objection doesn't mean that it's impossible to address. And I think, rationally speaking, people with one another, um, I think that's a really simple conversation if each person in the conversation gives the other the room to participate in that conversation. I think when objections really become an issue is when we put a lot of unnecessary emotion into it, and we're anxious about getting a potential objection, and we're trying to make sure that we're prepared, and we've got all this ego tied up in how we're going to look if we don't handle it the right way. But what if we don't handle it at all? And we're
Yeah.
projecting all of this stuff on our prospect as well. It's like, when sales as a profession first started, it was really just about meaningful, logical
Yeah.
conversations. And our friend Todd Capone does a lot of research and digs into the history of this. And he talks about how it was such a noble profession 100 odd years ago, and one that was vital and important and respected. And when people are respected in that way, those conversations aren't contentious typically. Either one, the prospect gives you the respect that you're due, so they'll actually listen to you. And since that person is respected, since the seller is respected and doesn't want to disrespect their prospect, they're not going to come off as pretentious and overbearing
Yeah.
and manipulative and all the things that we're afraid of. We have so many negative emotions tied up in selling that I think we project a lot of our own difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. My only deal with the history is that, dude, these sellers didn't have to deal with the types of buyers that we have to deal with now. They weren't as
Sure.
educated. When I need a salesperson to educate me on something, I mean, that's why it's so commoditized now.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to talk to a salesperson unless I'm buying an enterprise software. Like any product that I'd want to buy for my business, I can buy it without talking to someone if I wanted to. I could say, hey, I just want to buy this. I don't want to talk to you. You're like, okay. Like I don't need them to educate me. You know what I mean? That's the thing I feel
Well,
like a lot of the Yeah, God, I can't remember where. Maybe it was Todd that was talking about this, but I think IBM kind of fucked it up quite a bit for a lot of salespeople.
Okay. Okay. And look, I'm not saying, I'm certainly not going to argue with you that the situation is different and that, in a lot of ways it's broken.
Yeah,
That is for sure, because you're talking about unnecessarily scaling things quickly, and a lot of things like that. And that's where a lot of issues get forced. And that's where a lot of bad habits
yeah,
start. Like, listen, our profession, as much as you and I love it, has some issues,
yeah,
full stop. Right. But and you can buy things for your business because you don't need a full enterprise solution, at least where it is right
yeah.
now. Like, and I'm in the same boat, but I want that help. I want that insight. I want to know I'm making the right decision. I want to talk to people who have been where I haven't and who have seen the
Yeah.
potential roadblocks
Let
and
me ask you
issues.
this though. Sorry
Yeah.
for interrupting you.
No, go
Let
ahead.
me,
It's your
because I've got
show,
to
man.
know, like, how many. And this question is because we're about to talk about top performers and what these people do differently.
Yeah.
This question is coming from a place of just really kind of confusion almost.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, how many salespeople have you interacted with your business that you actually enjoyed the conversation? Like literally, how many have you had in the history of your business?
Not enough. It's never enough.
But could you count it on one hand?
No, take me more than that.
Two hands?
I might have to go to another. I'm at least 2 hands and probably 2 feet. The second, the 10th toe might be
Of
debatable there.
salespeople you talk to where you feel like, oh, I learned something from this interactive. Like, I'm
Yeah.
glad I really. For
Yeah.
me, it's
I mean,
like
as far as
two
people I've
people.
worked with, okay, now you're talking about people I've worked
No,
with,
no, no.
like clients, or are you
I've
talking about
sold
people trying to
people
sell me stuff?
selling to you.
Oh,
People selling to you.
yeah. No, there's a tremendous potential and opportunity out there for anybody who wants to raise their game. Like, and
Yeah.
I'll go back to this. And you've worked with a ton of great reps too. I mean, you've had them on this podcast and
Oh,
Top
yeah.
One Squad.
I've
Like,
worked
you've
with
worked with some real
dozens.
killers,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I know
Okay. I
over
misunderstood
100
your
really
question.
good reps that if I was building a sales team, these would be the first
Yeah.
people I would choose. I'm talking about people who have sold to you. And I get that we're not
Oh, yeah.
executives at really large companies. We're not getting the best of the enterprise sellers selling to us. So I'm not trying to inflate our egos or anything, but like I'm trying to just illustrate the opportunity that there is for
So
people to differentiate them. It's crazy.
summer 2005. I'm sitting in a bar in East Lansing after a training session, and I'm with my manager and the regional sales manager who we kind of reported to. We were distributor reps, kind of manufacturers reps representing this company. And so we're having lunch after training session, and I'm new, right? And I'm green. And this guy, he looks at me and he says, "Jeff, you're going to do really well. You stay focused, stay organized." He's like, "I'm going to tell you, there is a startling amount of mediocrity out there that looks a lot like success. It's not that hard to rise just above it. Stay focused, stay diligent, do the right things, study hard, do the work. You're going to be amazing. Like, don't trick yourself into believing that it's hard, or certainly harder than it really is, to be really good at this, because
Yeah.
it doesn't take the bar's not set that high, Jeff." And I think about that at least once a quarter when I'm reminded. Sometimes it's to kick my own ass and to remind myself that, hey, you know what, Jeff, maybe 80% of you is still better than 95% of the people that are out there. Just do better tomorrow. Or when I see some other people, or when I have to have this conversation with someone else that I mentor or that I talk to who's just getting into this, I'm like, don't be intimidated by what success looks like. The blocking and tackling is where it's at, and I mean, we're 17 years later. It's still true. Here we are. And I don't think it'll ever be proven wrong.
Yeah. A friend of the show, Bilal Batrawi, what he always says is you're graded on a curve. And the good thing is that in sales, it's pretty easy to differentiate yourself. It really is,
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, I think one of the biggest like privileges I feel like people like us have is the work we do is we get to work with some awesome sales reps, dude. Like some freaking studs, some really good men and women that just crush it. So what are some of those patterns that you see in the people that do extremely well at the companies that you work with? What are some of those habits of these top performers?
I think first and foremost, they're proud to be in sales.
Yeah.
Like all this apologizing for being in sales. And I heard you on an episode recently, you're kind of breaking down some emails. I think Will Allred was on with you, and you were breaking down an email, and the first line was, "Sorry to bother you." I'm like, right away, I'm talking to myself. I'm like, don't apologize for being in sales. Don't apologize for being in sales. Don't apologize for being in sales. Like you're here to help people, period. And they picked up the phone, right? Like if you're calling, which you should do, if you're calling and they picked up the phone, they participated in the interruption, right? If they're reading the email, they're participating in the interruption. Don't apologize for that. But they're proud to be in sales. They're purpose driven, right? They have an alignment between who they are, what they do, how they serve. They know their why, right? They treat selling as a career, not just as a job. They appreciate the long term. They appreciate that this is a step in the process. No step is too small so long as you're headed in the right direction. You keep taking steps, right? Think about the long play and play the long game. They take ownership of their outcomes, and they don't, get distracted by silos. And, if you're an SDR and things didn't convert, then that's the AE's fault. If you're an AE and you don't have enough leads, it's the SDR's fault. It's always marketing's fault. Like, what? Hold on. I have a number to deliver. I'm going to do what I need to do to deliver that number. Right. I like to think that they begin with the end in mind, or say it this way. They begin with the end in mind, that they understand what needs to be done, not just what to do. And this gets back to what we were talking about before. Like, just because you've made a lot of sales doesn't mean that you know how to sell. And do you understand the bigger concepts? Do you understand what needs to happen in this sales call? Or are you relying on the script that someone else wrote for you? Right. I was just talking about this on a webinar earlier today. Top performers don't just sell, they create an environment to buy, which to me means that they get emotional early on. They engage emotions very early on. They're very curious, particularly in discovery, which means they're willing to be wrong. They don't go on their own assumptions, and they get vulnerable enough to allow their prospects to get vulnerable with them. Right? That creates this level of comfort and partnership that your prospects need to feel in order to move forward with you. And the way I kind of end all the lists like this is they keep their swagger. They have a mindset about them that allows them to keep moving forward. They don't get too high with the highs. They don't get too low with the lows. I didn't know what that meant till about 5 years into my career. And they find a way to put themselves in a mental position that allows them to succeed. All of this comes down to them seeing a bigger picture. Top performers see a bigger picture than anybody else. They see, not sometimes they even see kind of the lines of code in the matrix, right? But in general, they just have a larger purview. They have a wider scope, and they have much more patience. They have a much more stable emotions, and they see the good in things much more often than mediocre salespeople do. Those are what I call the 7 intangible traits, or the 7 intangible characteristics of top sellers.
Let's definitely dig into those. I interviewed, it hasn't gone live yet, but I interviewed Henry Scheck. He's the CEO of ZoomInfo. Mm-hmm. So I asked him, I said, when you're a prospect, like when you hop on a sales call and you're the prospect, which ZoomInfo is a publicly traded company, pretty big software company, right? If he's hopping on a sales call as a prospect, it's a really big deal that they're trying to work, right? That salesperson's trying to work, or that team. And I asked him, what do you want to take away from a call if you're going to hop on it? And what feels like an absolute waste of your time? What do you think he said?
Oh, am I going to learn something?
Yep. It's exactly what he said. He said, he used this phrase, best in class. He said, I want to know what the best in class looks like that's using your solution. So if you're trying to sell me XYZ product or service or whatever, tell me about how a company is using this right now in a best in class, world class way. I want to be able to get from step A to D. I don't want to have to go through B and C.
Yeah.
And what that made me think of is he's got this mindset and this approach around being world class. And everything that you said just now, if I had to sum that up, it would be like raising your fucking expectations of yourself and expecting excellence, demanding excellence from yourself. You know what I mean? There's something, I don't even know how to describe it. It's an intangible thing that you see in really high level athletes, musicians, actors, whatever it might be. And I see it in my best clients too, where they don't accept mediocre effort. The things that they can control, they don't accept showing up to a sales call unprepared. They don't accept asking shitty questions to the prospect. They don't accept doing a demo with someone and not engaging the prospect and them not feeling like they just don't accept that, you know?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, it touches on the nuance that we talked about before, right? And it's funny because, season 2 of the Rethink the Way You Sell podcast is about top performers and what makes them different. And what I've noticed about top performers at the top of the top is that doesn't have anything to do with additional closing skills or selling skills or, even organizational skills. I touch on that a little bit, but it's not these tangible things that, I just need to go read a book on that, or, I need to practice this more. Right. I mean, certainly there's an element of practice that's important, but there's certainly a level of knowledge that's important. But most salespeople know enough to be successful, know enough to be quite dangerous in their fields, but they're not doing it because they're holding themselves back in one way or another. And so what I wanted to show people was that when you look at what really moves the needle, it's execution. And then if you really want to cut it fine and polish some of the areas there where you can really get better, it's about your mindset. It's about your standards. It's about your boundaries. It's about what I've mentioned the blocking and tackling, like it's mentioned all the time. Like, do you accept anything less than your best?
Yeah.
And do you put yourself in position to deliver your best all the time? And, someone who thinks they're better than they are will show up and haphazardly perform unprepared and say, I got it. It's not that big of a deal. I'm good at this. I can wing it. Well, it's just another sales call. What is the CEO going to show up? Come on, whatever. And then all of a sudden the CEO shows up and they shit themselves because they're not ready.
Yeah.
Right. You've seen this. And it's like, and then they lose a big opportunity. You know what I mean? It's like the very best salespeople realize that they can't win them all because there are things that are going to happen outside of anybody's control that will either put them in a position unfairly to fail or sometimes unfairly to succeed. Okay. At the end of the day, it all evens out. Don't worry about it. Just go back to work. Do the job. And, it's the best performers that I have ever worked with or observed have these routines that they stay in. Not because they're overly prescribed, right? But just because this is what I know that it takes for me to do my best work. So I'm going to put myself in position to do my very best work every day. That's all anybody can ask for. And they make sure they deliver that.
What are some of the routines that you've heard or seen folks do? Either morning routine or, routines before they get into a prospecting block, or routine they go through maybe to prepare for a sales call. What kind of stuff have you seen?
I mean, I've seen all kinds of things. And I mean, I've had several of my own. I don't have a very prescriptive morning routine myself. I mean, I like to spend it quietly. Typically, I don't always read. Sometimes I do. I don't always meditate. Sometimes I do. I don't always drink coffee. Sometimes I do.
But that's the one must for me every morning. The coffee part. Gotta have the coffee, dude.
I really enjoy a good cup of coffee. What I've found though is that if I don't have time to actually sit and enjoy it, it's just kind of a waste. It's like, I don't drink beers while I, type up my weekly, newsletter either anymore, because I was just like, man, I just drink 2 beers and not even recognize it. Like, what a waste. Right. So, but anyway, I've seen people I think the most important routine, though, I was going to just say something about prospecting blocks, is that you set aside the time to do the things that need to be done, which I think is a routine
Yeah.
in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I know people that on Sunday night for 30 minutes, they look at their week and they just say, okay, where's my activity going to come from? What does the calendar look like already? What's the hand I've dealt myself, which is what the calendar is? Where do I need to amend it? What needs to happen? Okay, great. Where does that fit into the overall plan? I've talked to some people who are like, nope, on weekends, I don't do it. I'll wake up half an hour early on Monday morning and do that. Like, okay, yeah, that works. I know some people who do it on Friday, but the routines, I think the common denominator of the routines is they always focus around the most important activities. You can be proactive when you plan, but you know as well as I do, and if you don't have boundaries around the time blocks, I like to say if your calendar couldn't be used as evidence in a court of law to convict you of being in sales, then you're doing it
Yeah.
wrong. Right? Where are your prospecting blocks? Where are the meetings? If you can't prospect because you have so many meetings with clients, where are they? Are they on your calendar already? Like if you're going to have 3 sales calls a day, for the next 2 weeks, then hey, great. Then maybe you can make the argument that you don't need to prospect anymore, and you have a bunch of prep to do. All right, but you and I both know that you get into the flow of your day, and then all of a sudden it hits the fan. And now you've got to respond to this, and a customer called, and then you're working from home and the Wi-Fi went down. So you got to troubleshoot that and get on the phone with your service provider. And, it can go sideways quickly. So if you don't make sure that there is time set aside, and most importantly, hold yourself accountable to actually keeping those boundaries up, the work isn't going to get done. So I think the routines vary in terms of personal preference. And, I don't know, some people like to listen to heavy metal music before they, or something really intense and heavy before they call so that they can get all fired up. That's great. Some people like to listen to classical music because it calms them down and puts them in a Zen-like state. That part doesn't matter, but the routines to me are all about the mindset and what kind of a mindset are you putting yourself into in order to execute effectively. And first step is recognizing that you need to do something.
Yeah. Routines are so important. We have these like patterns that we get into where sometimes you just need to interrupt that pattern a bit. And it could be shifting your routine a bit. You know what I mean? Like an example of what I'm talking about is if you take the icons on your phone, on your iPhone, and you take the icon that's in the bottom right on your screen and push it to the upper left, and it shifts every icon over one, it just fucks with you. The next time you open your phone, you can't find what you're looking for. And what you find is that, hey, when I click on that social media app or whatever it is, it's not there. I have to be intentional about what I'm going to do when I open up my phone. And I think, like you said, with the routine, having a routine, something that you do that cues a certain behavior. I was working with a guy, on holidays, because we're recording this right after Labor Day or Memorial Day, excuse me. The call blocks after holidays in our outbound squad program tend to be pretty bare, on like a Tuesday when Monday was Labor Day. So we had 2 people show up, and the one of them we spent a lot of time with. But this guy, we were working with him on his cold calling. Mm-hmm. And that was the big kind of takeaway from it. It was just not only having him listen to himself talk and all this other stuff and talk about what to say, but we came up with a routine that he could go through when he's about to start his call block to get him in a better like mental state to where he's more excited to talk to people. And it was really simple, dude. It was like, you're not going to make any calls sitting down. You got to stand up. Sure. Okay. And you got to stick your chest out and you got to smile. I want you to pretend like you're walking past someone that you really want to date. What would your posture be, dude? Mm-hmm. What would you look like, right? What would you say? What would your level of energy be if you were going to go and approach that person and talk to them? You know what I mean? Right. It's like, do that. We found out what his favorite song is. I want you to put that song on. And then I want you to do something physical. It could be 10 jumping jacks. It could be 10 burpees. It could be 5 push-ups, whatever it is. Do something. And then now you have this little thing that you're doing. I think those routines are so important for stuff that's really hard. Yeah. For stuff that's really hard to get yourself to do, having something that warms you up and gets you going in that routine. No different than I love snowboarding, but dude, you don't just walk up to the top of the mountain and just go down. Like you do a couple warm-up runs, dude. You know what I mean? Like before you do
Yeah.
a heavy weightlifting session, you have a couple of sets, or maybe you hit the Stairmaster or the treadmill, like you warm up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Before you do this, like why wouldn't we treat sales the same exact way? Why wouldn't you have a warm-up routine? Like 5 minutes, dude, of something that you know, music, doing something physical, going outside, whatever it is, like something that works for you to get you in that routine. You know what I mean?
Got to warm your brain up. That's why so
Yeah.
many people rely on coffee or caffeine, really. It's like, that stimulant, that's a jolt. It's there. And, my brain moves a lot faster when it's caffeinated. There's no question about that. Sometimes too quickly, and I have a hard time keeping things straight, which is why I can't drink too much coffee anymore. But because I love coffee just as much as the next guy, don't get me wrong here, but you're exactly right. Like, what are you doing to put yourself in the mindset? Right. That's why, I do like to read or listen to a podcast or do something in the morning when I'm trying to get warmed up. I'm trying to get those synapses firing in a way that's coherent. And then I'll read something that'll make me think, and then I'll kind of go off sideways for a little bit. And I enjoy that. What are you doing to focus your brain on what needs to happen? Right. And what's interesting is even about the, 10 burpees before a cold calling block. Like, okay, how do you connect burpees and cold calling? Well, when you do 10 burpees before you do that cold calling block, now as soon as you start doing burpees, your mind is starting to get ready for what comes next. That's the value of it. And there is so much less friction in the task switching of moving from, down on the floor in a push-up position, up to, now I'm on the phone walking with my chest out. I'll tell you what, the swole that you get from doing a few push-ups,
Yeah.
prior, that doesn't help. It doesn't hurt your posture much either. Right. So, I mean, like there's even some ties that you can put together there, but like, what are you doing to get ready, and what feels normal when you're getting ready? And then what is the carryover from that? It's almost Pavlovian. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What have you noticed in the reps that you've worked with, the top reps around game film, like reviewing performance? Do they record calls? Do they review calls? How do they coach themselves?
What I notice more than anything, because I tend to work with people who are outside sellers or aren't always in a position where they can record their calls, there's almost an immediate playback in their head. That's certainly
Yeah.
how it is with me. And that started when I was riding with my mentor, or riding with anybody, really, when people I mentored, or just colleagues when we would co-travel together. I like to have people from marketing in the car with me. Sometimes it was really great opportunity to build some relationships within the company and also show them what we were dealing with in the field. And, we'd walk out of a call and it'd be like, how'd that go? Did you see what she did when you said this? Did you see what he did when I said this? Like, that was one, how I learned. And two, like, it just makes you be so much more self-aware. And what I learned throughout my career is when I thought about the postmortem after the call, I was much more present during the call. And sometimes I could even be assessing myself. And that happens a lot more now. Like, I can tell if a call's going well, if a call's not going well. I pay so much more attention to responses. And then it's like, okay, how do I fix that? How do okay, he didn't answer that the way I hoped he would. All right, we're going to have to take this in a different direction. When you've had enough reps to go through that stuff, you start to pick up on your own patterns, and you can not only prevent some of those things from going awry, but if they do happen to just go in the wrong direction for you, you're able to kind of right the ship. So most of the reps that I see, it's an immediate breakdown afterward. And I'll be the guy that talks to myself walking back to the car in the parking lot from a bad office call. Or I'll be the guy that gets up from my desk after a call and it's like, oh my gosh, all right, how did that go? That went really well. What could still go wrong? Or that didn't go as well as I thought it would, but oh, you know what? No, let me remind myself what I know to be true. They still agreed to this. They still agreed to this. We have another meeting. Like, there's, regardless of whether or not you're in a position to actually record your conversations, there's always a mental recording going on here. The black box is always active. And if you train yourself to pay attention to those things, you're going to get a lot more feedback. You're going to be able to give yourself a lot more feedback, and you're going to get better. If you have the ability to go back, whether it's whatever software you're using, there are a bunch of them out there to record your Zoom calls and things like that. It's excruciating to listen to yourself, particularly and play things back. Like, it's really, really hard. That's why most people don't do it. But when you do it, it's tremendous. And I think, the easiest or simplest example of this is, the early days of the Why and the Buy podcast when I was our producer. And I listened to everything I said, and I listened to everything Christy said, and I picked up on all my ticks and all of hers, and it made me better. And then finally came a point where we just, outsourced the production. That made a lot of things better. But, I still have that experience to lean back on and learn from, because I actually listened to what I was saying, what I shouldn't have been saying, what I could have said better. And all of that mindset of continuous improvement, sharpening the saw, that's what top reps are focused on. The bummer for me is when I work with a rep who's been doing this for a while, maybe they have 5-10 years, maybe a little less left, and they're done. They don't really feel like they can learn anymore. It's not that they can't, it's that they don't want to.
Yeah.
Like that hurts my feelings. Not just because I'm in a position to help them, but because it's like, man, are you that unenthused by what you do, that you're not interested in not just doing it better, but learning something that might make it more fun? Think about all the ways that we help people, Jason. It's not just about upskilling them. It's about having them make new connections, see new things, and find new ways to put deals together. That's fun. That's problem solving. When I see someone who refuses to get better or practice solving problems, it hurts my feelings. I feel so bad for them. Wow, you must be miserable. You must really be miserable.
Yeah, it's you're already doing the job. Why not get better results out of the time that you're already spending? That's the part I don't really understand. That's why I love Outbound Squad so much. Is it's all those reps in that program. We're all about to cross 100. They want to be there. When I work with a company, 20% of that group doesn't really want to be there. It's just a job to them.
20's on the low end sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. So
you're being too kind.
Yeah. We talked about best in class, commitment, this debriefing, the routines. Last thing I want to touch on real quick is confidence. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned swagger and that sort of thing. There is Ethan, one of our coaches here, he talks about how he describes the confidence in the first 30, 60 seconds of the cold call. I thought was kind of interesting. And it has to do with certainty versus uncertainty. How certain does this person sound like that they're talking to the right person and that they have a good reason and that they can help them? If the person is willing to be helped and is able to be helped. Yeah. Certainty, I thought, was a really interesting way to describe that. How do you think about, kind of confidence, and how do we get our confidence to the next level? Because doing this for me has been so big in the last year. And there's been a culmination of a bunch of different things that, sort of led to that. But how do you think about, how a rep might think about leveling up their confidence?
It's a fun story. I guess it was 8 years ago now. I went to Bandon Dunes to play golf for the first time on a golf trip with a bunch of guys.
My neck of the woods.
Yeah. Love it out there. One of my favorite, you can drop a pin on the 4th tee box at Pacific Dunes, and it is literally one of the happiest places I've ever been in my entire life. We can tell that story another time. But I was there, and the cool thing about the caddies there is that when you go with a group, all the same caddies are with your group. So they get to know you, they get to know your games. You may not have the same person every time, but I did in this case. And, one of the first couple holes we go out, he's carrying my bag, and I made a couple of putts that weren't gimmies. And he's like, "Oh, you can putt." And that was kind of the refrain the whole time. And he'd be lining me up and, help me. He'd read my putts for me sometimes and everything, just confirm him. And then he'd say, hit this one with conviction. You're a good putter. And with conviction stuck with me, which is the same thing as what Ethan's talking about with certainty. And, I became a better putter throughout the week because I had him, one, chirping in my ear, but two, I routinely matched the expectations, the higher expectations that he set for me, simply because he believed I was going to make the putt, which made me believe that I was going to make the putt, which meant a lot more putts went in. And you know what? The ones that didn't, I can't win them all. It completely raised the ceiling on potential and also raised the floor on potential, because even when the ones didn't go right, it was like, you know what? Hey, I hit a good putt. What are you going to do? Gust of wind, blade of grass, whatever it is, spike mark, whatever, stuff outside of my control. So when, as a rep, you do everything you can with conviction, with belief, with the understanding that you've done all the work necessary, you've put yourself in the best possible position to succeed because of the training, because of the practice, because of your own standards, because you're setting the boundaries around the things that are most important. You really believe that you're in the best possible place to succeed. Now you just have to do your part with conviction. But do you believe that you're in that spot? Do you believe that you're capable? If you don't believe you've done the work, if you don't believe you've got the boundaries, if you don't believe that you're putting yourself in the best position, well, then why not? And that's where a top performer might be a little too hard on themselves, but that's where a top performer will look in the mirror and say, okay, where am I lacking? Have I really done everything I can do? And if I can, or if I have, then hey, great. It's time to see how it all plays out. But if I haven't, then why not? And what am I going to do to put myself in that position if I haven't already? And that's where that confidence comes from. That's where that certainty comes from. It's, look, there's always something to work on, but am I being fair with myself right now? Am I remembering that there's a startling amount of mediocrity out there that disguises itself as success? Do I look at my peers? Do I look at the work that they're not doing? And am I really following my own intuition as to what I believe is the best thing for me to do? Yeah. Okay. Once I'm in that spot, all right, man, it's time to go to work. We've done all the preparation. Now it's time to, you put in all the practice. Now it's time to pick up the phone. You put in the practice. It's time to walk on that stage in front of 10,000 people and deliver a speech. You put all your practice time in. It's time to walk to the first tee, and it's time to tee it up. It's time to hit those free throws to win the game. It's time to propose to, your partner, right? You and I both had to do that. It's, hey, showtime, right? Do you do that with conviction? If you do, then let it rip. If you don't, then look at why you can't be convicted in yourself and fix that. Maybe that takes a little help. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just needs someone to hold you accountable. You can tell them you're doing this thing, and when we talk next week, ask me if I did it. Oh, okay, cool. Right? But ultimately, do you want it badly enough? Is your purpose in alignment with what you're trying to do enough to where you will actually do those things? I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but
no, I love it. I think there's so much just to the internal belief, and as a sales leader, one of the most powerful things that you can say to a sales rep is, I believe in you. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. And you as a rep need to be working for sales leadership that believes in you, and that's a good question to ask your manager too. Hey, do you believe in me? And just hear if they have some hesitations too around stuff that you might need to work through.
And the delivery too, it's really easy. It's common parlance to just say, oh, you got this. We say that all the time. Oh, you got this. If you're a manager, flip that around. Don't say, hey, you got this. Look your rep in the eye and say, I believe in you.
Yep.
You're going to make this happen. Let me know how it goes. Come back. Let's debrief. Right? But that very deliberate, I believe in you, goes miles further than you got this.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the power of that.
Yep. We got to take off, dude. This flew by, man. Where can people go and check you out? You got a podcast, a bunch of stuff you're doing. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about what you're up to?
I do. Thank you. Rethink the Way You Sell. That's my new podcast. I am 2 seasons in. The 3rd season is all about prospecting. It's about my, unique approach to prospecting. So I'm really excited to be working on that right now. And by the time this airs, it'll be really close. Or jeffbajorek.com. So if you're already in a podcast player, just go search Rethink the Way You Sell, hit the subscribe button right after you subscribe to this one, and then go to jeffbajorek.com. You can learn more about me there.